there are lineups, as we're about to talk about, without Jokic that have gotten less bad
Hey,
as the
that's the
season
right moniker
progresses.
for it as well.
So actually, I took a bunch of these numbers before last night's Grizzlies game, and then I went back and I actually just kept the old numbers to see how much just that win over the Grizzlies helped. One of the first ones was just the Nuggets net rating without Jokic was minus 21.2 net before that Grizzlies game, and now they're only a minus 14. So
Look at that.
that is progress, okay? The first lineup we have to talk about is the one that the first sort of major bench lineup that the Nuggets rolled out with to start the year, and that was Russ, Julian, Peyton, MPJ, and Dario. They played 48 possessions. This was over the first 2 or 3 games. I know Malone started to tinker with the bench really after that first game, but Dario and Russ basically were anchoring the bench for the first 5 games of the season. This lineup was a minus 76.5 net.
Impressive, honestly.
It was yeah, I called it the death lineup because it was killing us. It is 60 offensive rating, 60.4, and then a 137 defensive rating. I know what we played those first 2 games against what ended up being like at least an okay team in the Clippers, pretty good defensive team, and then obviously OKC, who were the best team in the NBA at that point. But this lineup did play through a couple more games anyway, and it was just not going well.
I do want to make one correction here. They in the first game of the season, they used Jamal as the stagger, and they used
in the first game.
Yes.
Okay.
Jamal, Russ, Dario. They used Julian at the 3 and Peyton at the 4.
And Peyton. Okay, I have that one here too, and that one was less bad.
Yeah, it was bad. It was
but it was still bad. It was bad enough that they changed things up,
and then it got worse. So that was what really happened over the course of those next 2, 3, 4 games. Was that they're like, yeah, you know what? We're gonna try to get Mike out there. We're gonna get Russ to play as the main point guard, somebody that can do things, and then Dario is the DHO guy, and it was about as horrible as it could be. It doesn't mean that it can't get better, but like, I honestly think that if we're talking about it, I think that they should go back to that one when everybody gets healthy.
So that lineup, like they played in preseason. I couldn't find preseason lineup data because Cleaning the Glass doesn't do that. And actually, NBA.com didn't have preseason lineup data either. But I just remember watching the bench in preseason and thinking, okay, I know, I know what this group is trying to do. And of course, that's versus preseason defenses, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that really stood out to me about this lineup, just watching the games, was like, man, Dario could not make a layup. And that's really tough. That would explain the 60 offensive rating for, relatively limited set of possessions. But it just seemed like, we even see it in the difference between, like you said, they were using Jamal as a stagger in the first game and then changed it over to Mike after that, and it got worse. But we've seen over the course of this road trip that for some reason, whether Russ is on the floor or not, having Jamal out there with Dario makes those line. I mean, and Jamal is a good player, as it turns out. Like, he can make a lineup better. But particularly that pairing of like Jamal with Dario on that bench seems to make a major difference, whether it's just making a lineup less bad or actually turning it into something positive. So what do you think about that?
I'm curious to see how it evolves going forward. I have long thought that Jamal and Dario would be a good fit because of Dario's ability to run the DHO, to pick and pop, and to be in the spaces that Jokic is usually in on the offensive end. It's going to be a sense of familiarity for Jamal. And they never really got to that in that first game because they were playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, the best perimeter.
Who don't let you play the way that you want to play.
Like, absolutely. Like, they were unbelievable. So, and then they immediately went away from it. And I understand why they did it, but I also can sit here and say that, like, I like what Russ and Jokic have done overall with when they're out there. And I kind of like what Jamal and Dario can do. And at least the theory of the practice is pretty good. I don't know if it'll ultimately look that great going forward, but if we're trying to come up with different ways for the bench and for different lineups to be successful, that's one that I think they could try. Now, do you go with Jamal, Russ, and Dario? Like that's where you really start to have some
So
questions.
I've got some great comparisons for you on that.
Great.
So, 2 lineups here. The one that we just talked about, which was, I think, just the one that they played in that first game versus the Thunder. Russ, Jamal, Julian, Peyton, and Dario. Maybe they played it, like, briefly in some other game, just kind of by the way of things staggering. If you replace, let's see, Peyton with MPJ and Julian with Christian, so you putting 2 more starters out there, of course.
Yeah.
That turns into a plus 10.5, and that's Dario with 2 point guards. Now, I don't know which games they played those together in. I'm sure it happened over the course of this road trip at one point, but that lineup has a 138 offensive rating. The defense is let's not talk about that.
Not worried about that yet.
But I have some more, I have my question here is were we wrong about the 2 point guard lineup in that it could never work?
I didn't ever think that it could never work. That's
Okay.
that's an important distinction there. A lot of folks were like, I don't this will never work. This will never happen. I'm always wanting to see something before immediately writing it off if I can possibly. And then I saw it that first game and I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna work. But it just is about the different situations and the
Yeah.
different ancillary pieces. Can you get an elite off ball shooter in the forward spot, like a Michael Porter? Or is it going to be kind of shaky with Peyton Watson? I think that makes a big difference in some of those configurations. Now, you can't always put all of your starters with the bench and then expect then, okay, yeah, the bench is going to be great at that point, but then you don't have time for the starters to rest. And you're going to get these 36 to 38-minute games from all these guys, and they got to figure that out. But I do think that, like, could you get Aaron Gordon out there with Dario Saric? Could you get Jamal and Russ and AG and Sarge, and then maybe have Julian Strother out there as another floor spacer? Like, I could see that working. I could see
And
Mike
they've been
being the
trying
stagger.
so many things this season.
Yeah,
Like, I think a lot of people thought it's just gonna be the same old thing in which they like in that they only try one bench the entire. I mean, it was necessitated by, first Jamal's absence and then AG's absence with his injury. But like you mentioned, it was after that first game versus the Thunder, they were already like, okay, we got to rework this bench. And it feels like they've been trying different things every single game. Like we got Vlatko at the 5 lineups
yeah.
over the last 2 games in Memphis, and he hasn't been playing.
I give Michael Malone a ton of credit. Like, honestly, he catches a lot of flack from different sects of Nuggets fans that like don't necessarily appreciate what he does and what he means to the group, and they don't think he's that creative. And I don't think he was in situations these last couple of years where he had to be creative. Like he kind of knew the bench was going to suck this last year. Like that was going to be a thing. Like he's like there weren't a lot of reasons to believe otherwise, but I do think that this year, when you get in Russ and you get in Dario, you get in players that have been successful in other areas. And like Russ was previously a starter or a 6 man in his last couple stops. And obviously he's at a little different place in his career now, but still has some juice. Like there's no doubt about it. And then Dario,
Sometimes too
before,
much juice.
yeah, sometimes, maybe so. But it does feel like they're like the weapons are a little bit better this year. Like Peyton's a little bit more refined, Christian's more refined, obviously. Julian Strother's a little bit more settled down, and having different players that you can go to in those cases, it allows you to be a little bit more flexible. Well, like, hey, now we can play some starters with the second unit, and hopefully that actually makes some sense.
Yeah. I wanted to just talk a little bit about just a little bit more about these 2 point guard looks because they have improved over the course of this road trip. The Russ and Jamal lineups are actually after that Memphis win, they went from plus point 0.4 to plus 3.7 on the season,
Hmm.
that's a big leap without Jokic, right? So I because I had most of these numbers before this last game and then
Sure.
looked them up after that win. And then before the last game in Memphis, they were a plus 6.5 net with Dario Saric. Now they're a plus 3.6, so got a little bit worse. So,
That's okay.
give and
That's still
take.
like in the positive realm. So
Like when you're talking about like Jokic isn't on the floor, like I will take anything below -10.
yeah, at this point, like that's how you got to view it. And if Denver has different configurations that they can go to, that's going to help them. It's obviously will help them. So for those 2 point guard looks, I like the idea of Russ setting the table for Jamal or setting the table for Jamal and MPJ. And then you kind of play around with that and you see what it looks like. And maybe Dario can orient some things. Do you think that Dario's the right center for those particular groups?
So I looked at again, just basing on lineup data, we don't have a ton with the other centers is the
Yeah.
thing because they in that time that Dario was out of the rotation, they were trying so many different things. What I do know is that Zeke is not the answer. That's what I
Yeah.
know for
Yeah.
sure.
I feel very confident about that as well.
One of the things, I'll throw this question at you because, because we're on it with the centers, but were there combinations that surprised you in how good or how bad they were, whether it was 5-man, 2-man, 3-man, whatever rotations where you're like, or lineups where you're thinking, I just don't think this could work, or vice versa. You're like, this should work, but it's not working.
Not really. I think it's still very early to try to figure out what those combinations are going to look like.
Yeah.
I will say that with Christian and Jamal, like I kind of thought that that was going to be a really good combo for Denver. And when those two share the floor together, it's a plus 14.8 with
Oh,
or without
yay.
Nikola Jokic.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's a good one. I did not have that one on my list,
Like
right?
I thought that like Jamal's talked about this honestly. Like he wants like he's been very forthright about wanting Christian to be a runoff, about wanting him to be somebody who can be trusted and to do things and to empower him to continue to be as dynamic as he can be and try stuff. And I think that really helps. So you add Jokic to that mix, like, hey, shocker, it's going to go higher. But Jamal, Christian, and Joker, when they are out, there's a plus 20.7 in 392 possessions. So, like, that is just like what Jamal, KCP, and Joker were doing. So I don't think
Yeah.
there's any question as to whether Denver can win a championship with that particular mix, or if at least get to the postseason with that particular mix and be very, very successful. There will be some playoff questions to be sure, but I do think that Christian he's fully acquitted himself at this point.
The last just specific lineup I wanted to talk about was one that they used quite a lot over the course of this road trip. They actually used it almost 30 more possessions just in the last Grizzlies game. So this is a 3-starter stagger where, well, now Peyton's a starter temporarily, but
Sure.
this is what they've been starting with, which is Jamal, Christian, Peyton, MPJ, and Dario. That group has played 78 possessions together, and they're a plus 18. And they went from a plus 4.7 to a plus 18 after this most recent Grizzlies game. This is the thing is like this starting group over the course of this road trip has gotten off to great starts every single game, and then some
Yep.
other like thing shows up. The team like has issues, whether it's like rebounding or like hustling and like keeping it up and all of that. But that group has been able to like get off to good starts.
I will
And the
say,
thing that
like,
oh, go ahead.
let me stop you there, unfortunately, because
Yeah.
it's only a 93 offensive rating. Like,
Yes. So the thing
what
that
has
stands out to me is the defensive rating, is what I was going to say next, because the offense is not great. And
that is
it went from an 86 to a 75. That's the thing is like, I wonder when you're looking at lineup data, which numbers do you tend to trust more, the offensive or the defensive number? And does it just depend?
I think they're all I don't trust any of them
Okay.
until I see them for a longer period of time
Yeah.
against not the Memphis Grizzlies.
Right.
Because I think that Memphis, despite the fact that they've shown some good things,
They
like
can't shoot.
they do not strike me as a trustable shooting unit.
Yeah.
So that's one where
This
I'm
is like an
definitely
issue that I
monitoring.
had with Taylor Jenkins last year because I feel like he tried to turn them into a high volume 3-point shooting team. And I'm
Yeah.
like, God, like they can't do, they're better this year because they're attacking the paint more, but they're still like doing a lot of drive and kick And if you kind of let the bad shooters shoot, then you'll probably be okay.
Now, what I will trust is that Christian shut down Desmond Bain. Like, he was in his shirt the entire time and doing what he could to make him uncomfortable. And I trusted the effort that they brought in this last
Mhm.
game. Like Jamal,
Yeah.
Christian, Peyton, Mike, Jokic, or not Jokic, Dario. They knew that they had to get it done, and the effort that they brought forth really showed up on the defensive end. So I was glad to see it.
Yeah.
That translates. If you're looking for a lineup that can give you good minutes on the defensive end, it can include Jamal and MPJ. You just have to make sure that
And
they're
Dario.
healthy. And Dario. It just means that they have to play hard, and
Yeah.
they can. They showed it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I'm curious if they, when everybody's healthy, whether we, see this lineup again in some kind of non-Jokic unit. Um, was there anything over the course of either this road trip or earlier in the season? Because we talked about how much they've been experimenting. Is there anything that the coaching staff surprised you with? Where you're like, oh, didn't see this coming. This is
Hmm.
interesting.
Not really. And I,
Okay.
I do think that closing without Russ and closing with the Booth boys in both of those games against the Raptors and the Thunder, that's one that I would highlight and say, you know what? That was impressive. That was something that especially when Russ had played pretty well in each of those games, Michael Malone trusted the development process. He trusted the ability to space around Jokic and have tall, athletic shooters and defenders that could really do a variety of things out there on the floor, and then they paid him back. And that's one that, if I'm looking back at any moment in this year so far, and then like the most valuable moments that Denver has actually had, it's that Raptors game and that Thunder game,
Yeah.
because they were the ones where, yeah, it goes the other way, and you're feeling really ugly about what this season is looking like right now, because Denver's what, 8-5. They would be 6-7 if they lost both of those games, and they're well within their right to lose both of those games. But getting young guys to play in disadvantageous situations, high pressure situations, and then to show up in back to back games is a really big deal.
Yeah, completely agree. One of the lineups that did definitely surprise me, and we talked about it or before on the show, maybe last episode. Uh the Peyton slash Russ, however you want to look at it, at 5 lineups that we saw, particularly versus the Heat. But
Yeah.
I do believe they broke it out again versus Memphis
Mm.
in the second half of that game after, Vlatko got hurt. And I was expecting DJ to come back in the second half, and he did not. And I was like, okay, I guess there's no Edie, but what's going on here? But that lineup was actually pretty good. Like in that they survived. I don't
Yeah.
have the lineup data on this. It's such a small set of possessions, but we talked about versus the Heat how important it was to get a lineup of all 5 guys who have some level of court awareness out there to bust the Miami Heat's zone.
Yeah.
But were you surprised by that? Like, that's a really small lineup for them to go to, and kind of risky, especially on the glass, right?
Not surprised at all that they decided to do it. If I'm being honest, I thought that this was a good sign. I'm looking at some of the numbers now. The ones with Christian in there instead of Julian were not as good for whatever reason. Like, because Denver actually did pretty well in those. Actually, I'm looking at 13 possessions with Christian out there, Peyton Watson at the 4 or 5, and then Michael Porter at the other spot.
Hmm.
184 offensive rating, 200 defensive rating. I don't think it's sustainable, Grace. I
No.
really don't.
They were scoring every time because they knew how to like bust the Heat zone, but yeah.
I think it's okay. And like, look, there will be times when you can break that back out and see what
Right.
happens with it. But like, it just goes to show, if you don't trust a center, then you don't have to use one. It's not a
Yeah.
requirement. Denver can, in certain situations, go with a small group. Mike is already 6'10" and is a good rebounder. Peyton is already a good rim protector. You can find ways. Other guys just have to help rebounding.
Yeah, for sure. Gang rebounding, very, very important. Um, my well, do I want to call this my last question? I'll call it my last question before we get to the last segment. How many minutes have Zeke and Dario played together this season?
I'm going to say 2 minutes. I don't think that they've played a ton.
There are 0 possessions logged in cleaning the glass with
Man,
Zeke and Dario. Maybe they played in garbage time and it got filtered out. But
that is probably what it is, because they were down 25 and they're like, you know what, let's do this. That's interesting. That's not surprising to me, because I don't think that Zeke has really earned the opportunity to play. But
well, he's played at the 5 a ton, and that's definitely been the worst of the non-Jokić just center minutes. Like we talked about how rough it was for Dario earlier on. Actually, all of these numbers are before like the last Memphis game, but Dario had some good minutes in the rest of the road trip.
right.
He's minus 9.3 in over 250 possessions. Zeke Naji has been a minus 44.3 net on the floor without Jokić or DJ, or Dario. I was looking to filter out like this is the sole center on the floor.
Yeah.
That is by far the worst. DeAndre Jordan has actually had minus 7.4, like survivable, except that he's 36 and he just can't do that every night.
Yeah.
In just under 100 possessions. But it's interesting to me because just watching the game in Memphis yesterday, we tried so many different center options in that game. We had some Zeke minutes, we had some Dario minutes, we had some Flacco at 5 minutes. Or I don't know if we had Zeke minutes yesterday, but we did in the previous game. I need to think about that.
There were just very brief ones in between the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And like you would expect, they were bad.
In the second half.
They were bad.
Yes. And it was just different. Like there's like bad but survivable, and then there is just this just does not work. And part of that is like Zeke, has his limitations as a 5. But we talked about how there haven't even been Zeke with Dario minutes. And part of that is because you just want to play your better players more. And it's opened up like, okay, whether Peyton Watson wants to play 4 or not, he gets to be on the floor more if he's playing that position. We get more of MPJ at the floor at the 4 and get to see what he can do in that position with that kind of spacing offensively, what he can do defensively in that position as well. And so it just kind of leaves me wondering, like, what is it that we can do with Zeke? Same. Okay.
Honestly, like here's the thing. I don't think you can develop everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that Denver has made a commitment to Julian Strawther, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson. When he comes back, they will make a commitment to Deron Holmes. I think that they like Vlaco. We'll see what happens with this injury news and what it's going to look like going forward. But it's unfortunate. They gave Zeke what at the time was a pretty, it was a slight overpay, but like kind of the expectation was, hey, we'll see if you can kind of work yourself into this. We're going to give you an opportunity to be the backup center after winning a championship. And he just he doesn't get rebounding. He doesn't understand the offensive end. And the only thing that he really understands is how to kind of mess around with the shot form. And it's not good enough. Like he just doesn't understand it. Like I don't know how to say it any other way than that. And that sounds harsh.
And I mean, this is what I was referencing when I talked about getting 5 players on the floor that had the court awareness to break the zone. Like it was just like really, tough to deal with that. Otherwise, I don't know how else to say it. If you like our content, please remember to hit the like button. Please subscribe and share our show. We're trying to grow the channel. Hit the notification bell as well so that you can stay updated on all of our content. Leave us a review if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon Music. And even if you're not, you guys should head over there and give us a 5-star review anyway. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at What's in a Game NBA. We have our new, I still have it listed as a new clip channel, but it's been around, at What's in a Game NBA Clips. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.